Hey, amazing viewers! Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. A Christmas of Cold Hearts. Christmas in Greenwich had always been a dazzling affair. The kind of celebration that sparkled in the glow of handcrafted Swarovski ornaments hanging from the towering pine trees lining Maple Avenue. The streets, dusted with fresh snow, looked like something out of a holiday postcard, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted chestnuts lingered in the air. But this year, something felt different. I stood on the balcony of my modest colonial-style home, a cup of steaming coffee in my hands, watching as the morning light painted golden streaks across the quiet neighborhood. Inside, my husband, Michael, was helping our 6-year-old son, Tommy, button up his new red sweater, his favorite one. A $25 fine from Target that he had insisted on wearing because, in his words, it made him feel like Santa's best helper. I smiled, but there was a deep weight in my chest. We were just a few hours away from my parents' grand Christmas gathering, and I already knew how the evening would unfold. My parents, Robert and Margaret Sinclair, carried themselves like royalty in the elite social circles of Greenwich. My father, a retired investment banker, still held sway in financial circles, and my mother, well, she was the undisputed queen of every charity gala, country club luncheon, and high society event in town. Their white Victorian mansion, built in the 1920s, stood as a symbol of old money and deep-seated traditions. But for all their wealth and status, they had never made space in their hearts for my son. Unlike my siblings, who had married doctors, lawyers, and university professors, I had chosen love over prestige. Michael, my husband, worked as a middle manager at an IT firm, earning around $70,000 a year. We weren't wealthy by my parents' standards, but we had built a home filled with warmth, laughter, and love. To my parents, however, we were a disappointment, especially Tommy. Over the years, I had watched my parents shower my siblings' children with extravagant gifts and praise while my son was met with cold indifference. At social gatherings, my mother would boast about my nieces and nephews. Elizabeth's twins, who attended a prestigious private academy, Catherine's daughter, who excelled in law competitions, William's son, the budding athlete in a junior league. And yet, Tommy's name was rarely, if ever, mentioned. I had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had been foolish to keep trying to bridge the gap between my son and his grandparents. Every Sunday, we attended family dinners at my parents' home, and every Sunday, I saw the same thing. My son shrinking into himself, trying to understand why he was treated differently. And now, Christmas Eve was upon us. "Mom, do I have to go to Grandma's house?" Tommy's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He stood by the door, his little hands fiddling with the hem of his sweater. His big brown eyes, so full of hope and innocence, searched mine for an answer. My heart clenched. I knelt beside him, smoothing out his curly hair. "I know it's hard, sweetheart, but Daddy and I will be right there with you." I tried to make my voice sound reassuring, but even I wasn't sure if I believed it. Michael appeared at my side, placing a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Abe, buddy, Christmas is about family. And you know what? Santa might have left something special for you under Grandma's tree." Tommy hesitated but nodded, forcing a small smile. "Okay, Daddy." I exhaled, hoping that somehow, this year would be different. The drive to my parents' mansion was silent, save for the hum of Christmas songs playing softly from the radio. As we pulled into the long driveway, I caught sight of Elizabeth's luxury SUV and Catherine's sleek black Tesla already parked in front. The mansion, covered in twinkling white lights, loomed before us, looking as majestic as ever. The moment we stepped inside, the warmth of the house wrapped around us, an intoxicating mix of roast turkey, cinnamon, and pumpkin pie. The grand foyer was decorated with elegant garlands And in the center of the living room stood the towering 12-foot Christmas tree, its branches heavy with opulent ornaments and perfectly wrapped presents underneath. "Jenny, you're finally here." My mother's voice cut through the air like a blade. She stood in the doorway, wearing a white cashmere sweater and a string of pearls. Her eyes barely flickered toward Tommy before she leaned in to press a light kiss against my cheek. "You're late," she added, her tone laced with disapproval. From the living room, the excited voices of my nieces and nephews filled the space as they tore into their gifts. Elizabeth's twins were already engrossed in the latest gaming console, and Catherine's daughter was studying something on her brand-new tablet. The room buzzed with energy and privilege. Tommy squeezed my hand tightly. I could feel the tension in his tiny fingers. "Merry Christmas, Patricia," my father greeted, scotch in hand. I stiffened. He always called me by my maiden name, as if refusing to acknowledge that I was now Jennifer Miller, not Patricia Sinclair. My sister Elizabeth waved Tommy over. "Come here, sweetheart." Elizabeth was the only one who treated Tommy kindly, though tonight there was something apologetic in her eyes. She knew. She had seen it too. Then came my mother's voice. "My, that sweater. Did you get it at Target?" Her words, laced with condescension, cut through me like ice. I clenched my jaw, but before I could respond, Tommy proudly puffed out his chest. "Yes, Mommy got it for me, and I love it." I swallowed the lump in my throat. Dinner was as extravagant as ever. A feast laid out on Wedgwood china, complete with a golden brown turkey, homemade cranberry sauce, green bean casserole, and Whole Foods' signature pumpkin pie. The adults engaged in intellectual conversation, William discussing university investments, Catherine sharing legal insights, Elizabeth's husband explaining the latest in cardiac surgery. And then there was Michael. When my husband attempted to share stories from his work, my father merely grunted and swiftly changed the subject. When Tommy excitedly spoke about his school's Christmas play, my mother interrupted with a sharp, "Let's save the children's stories for later." I could feel Michael tense beside me. But the final blow came after dinner, during the gift exchange. One by one, my parents handed out lavish gifts: gaming consoles, designer clothes, premium sports equipment. The living room was filled with the excited shrieks of children tearing into their presents. Then, finally, it was Tommy's turn. My mother handed him a small, elegantly wrapped box. His little hands trembled with anticipation as he carefully unwrapped it. I held my breath. And then, silence. The box was empty. I felt the air leave my lungs as my mother smiled coldly. "He doesn't need anything." For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Tommy's eyes, full of hope just moments ago, filled with tears. His lip trembled as he looked up at me, confusion and hurt written all over his small face. The weight of years of silent cruelty, of exclusion, of favoritism, pressed down on me. And in that moment I knew. Enough was enough. Without a word, I stood up and wrapped my arms around Tommy, lifting him into my embrace. Michael rose beside me, his jaw clenched. We didn't need to make a scene. Our silence spoke volumes. As we walked out the door, I heard Elizabeth's small sigh. The weight of unspoken truths hung in the air. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in a quiet stillness. As we drove away, I caught a final glimpse of the glowing mansion in the rearview mirror, a house full of wealth, yet utterly empty. In the back seat, Tommy wiped his tears with the sleeve of his red sweater. Michael's voice was gentle as he drove. "Hey, Tommy, Daddy and Mommy love you. That will never change." And I knew then, we didn't need their approval. We had something far more valuable. We had each other. The breaking point. The silence that filled our car as we drove home was heavier than the snowfall blanketing the roads. The mansion, with its glittering lights and cold, hollow luxury, faded in the distance, but the sting of what had happened still clung to me like frost. I could hear Tommy sniffle quietly in the back seat, his small body curled up as he stared out the window. Michael's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his jaw clenched. The tension in his shoulders told me everything. He was holding in his anger, keeping it together for Tommy's sake. But I knew him. I knew he was fighting the urge to turn the car around and confront my parents, to demand why they treated our son like an outsider. But there was no point. They had made it clear for years that in their world, our son, our beautiful, kind, and intelligent son, was less because he wasn't born into the wealth and privilege they valued above all else. Tonight had only confirmed it. I turned in my seat to face Tommy, reaching back to hold his little hand. His fingers curled around mine, seeking warmth, seeking comfort. "Tommy," I said softly. He didn't look at me, his gaze fixed on the snowy streets outside. I could see the reflection of Christmas lights in his tear-streaked eyes. "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" His voice was small, uncertain. My heart shattered into a million pieces. "No, baby. No, you didn't do anything wrong." I squeezed his hand. "Grandma and Grandpa, they just don't understand how special you are." But they gave everyone else presents, and I got nothing. His voice cracked on the last word. He wasn't crying anymore. He was trying so hard to be brave. Michael exhaled sharply through his nose, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "You know what, buddy?" he said, his voice steady but firm. "Some people think presents and fancy things are what make you important. But they're wrong. The way you treat people, that's what matters. And you are one of the kindest, smartest kids I know. You don't need them to tell you that, because Mommy and I see it every single day." I could see Tommy's small fingers clutching the sleeve of his sweater. That red sweater he loved so much, the one my mother had scoffed at. "But why don't they love me, Daddy?" Michael and I locked eyes. There was no easy answer to that question. No gentle way to explain the twisted reality of my parents' elitism, their obsession with status, their cold dismissal of anyone who didn't fit their mold of worthy. So instead, I told Tommy the truth. "They don't know how to love the right way, sweetheart." My voice was thick with emotion. "But you don't ever have to worry about that. Because Mommy and Daddy, we love you more than anything in this world. And we always will." Tommy didn't say anything for a long time. He just held my hand a little tighter. That night, long after we tucked Tommy into bed, I sat awake, staring at my phone. The family group chat had exploded with messages. I had ignored them at first, too drained to even glance at the screen. But now, curiosity got the best of me. The first message was from Elizabeth. "Elizabeth, what happened tonight was absolutely unacceptable." "Catherine, I agree. That was cruel, even for Mom and Dad. Tommy is our family, and they treated him like he didn't even exist." "William, I can't believe they actually gave him an empty box. That wasn't just favoritism. That was outright humiliation." I swallowed hard. My siblings had always been aware of my parents' coldness toward Tommy, but they had never spoken up. Now, though, something had shifted. And then came my parents' response. "Mother, Patricia's choices led to these results. She knew what she was getting into when she married outside of her class. We did nothing wrong. We simply honored tradition. Father, this is what happens when you lower your standards. You reap what you sow." My stomach twisted with anger. The gall. The absolute audacity. Michael, sitting beside me in bed, glanced at the screen and let out a bitter laugh. "They're unbelievable. They don't even feel guilty," I whispered. "They'd really think they did nothing wrong." Michael shook his head. "They're never going to change, Jen. But we can't let them keep doing this. Not to Tommy." I nodded, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I had spent years trying to keep the peace, trying to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would come around, that they would see the wonderful, brilliant little boy they had ignored for so long. But they wouldn't, and I was done pretending otherwise. The next day, I met my siblings at Catherine's law office in Manhattan. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and in the distance, Greenwich's skyline was visible, hazy against the winter sky. Elizabeth, usually composed, looked furious. William paced near the desk, arms crossed. Catherine, ever the professional, had her laptop open, a document already pulled up. "I can't believe we let them get away with this for so long," Elizabeth muttered. "We all saw it," William admitted, "but I think we were too comfortable ignoring it, because it wasn't happening to us." I looked at them both, my voice sharp. "And now that it has," Catherine tapped her pen against the desk. "Now, we do something about it." She turned her laptop toward us. "Legally, we can't stop them from being emotionally cruel, but we can make sure they feel the consequences. They rely on us, on our support, our care. If they want to treat one of us like an outcast, then maybe it's time we reconsider our roles in their lives." William nodded, his expression grim. "I've run the numbers. If we withdraw our financial and logistical support, Sunday dinners, medical transport, home maintenance, it's going to hit them hard." Elizabeth crossed her arms. "And maybe it's time we start setting boundaries. If they want to act like Tommy doesn't exist, then maybe they don't need to be part of our family's lives anymore." I stared at them, my chest tight. For years, I had felt alone in this battle. But now, they were standing beside me. "Are we sure about this?" I asked quietly. "They chose this," Catherine said firmly. "We're just making them live with the consequences." For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. My parents had spent decades wielding power over us, controlling us with money, guilt, and expectation. But they had underestimated something. We weren't children anymore, and we weren't afraid to walk away. The fallout. The morning after our meeting at Catherine's office, I woke up to an unusually quiet house. No sound of cartoons playing in the living room. No footsteps pattering across the hardwood floors. Just stillness. Michael was already up, sitting at the dining table with his laptop open. But he wasn't working. His focus was on Tommy, who sat across from him, slowly stirring a spoon through his bowl of oatmeal. "Morning, buddy," I said softly, ruffling his hair as I walked by. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, but his voice was dull, almost lifeless. It had been 2 days since the Christmas disaster, and Tommy still wasn't himself. Usually he was up early, playing with his toys, full of excitement for the presents he had gotten from Santa. But this year, something had changed. He hadn't even touched the new train set Michael, and I had given him. "Sweetheart, do you want to go to the park today?" I asked, trying to lighten his mood. "We could go sledding, maybe get some hot chocolate after." Tommy just shook his head. "I don't feel like it." Michael and I exchanged a look. This wasn't like him. My 6-year-old son, the boy who usually had an endless supply of energy, suddenly had no interest in playing. I knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Tommy, are you still upset about Christmas?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I just don't get it," he whispered. "Why don't Grandma and Grandpa like me?" There it was, the question I had been dreading. "Tommy," Michael said, leaning forward, "it's not about you. It's about them. They don't understand how amazing you are. And you know what? That's their loss. But they love everyone else," Tommy murmured. "They gave everyone else presents, big presents, and I got nothing." I felt my throat tighten. It didn't matter how many times we reassured him, how many times we told him he was loved. He had seen the difference with his own eyes. He had felt the sting of their rejection, and now it was a wound that no amount of words could heal. "You know what we should do," I said, forcing a smile. "We should start a new Christmas tradition, just for us." Tommy finally looked up. "Like what?" "Like, every year we'll do something special, something that makes us happy. We won't worry about Grandma and Grandpa. We'll make our own fun." His little brow furrowed, thinking. "Like a Christmas adventure." Exactly. For the first time in days, a small spark returned to his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first strike. Later that morning, my phone buzzed. It was Elizabeth. "You're going to want to check the family group chat," she texted. I groaned. The last thing that I wanted was more drama. But I unlocked my phone anyway. The moment I saw the messages, I nearly dropped it. "Mother, I expect everyone at Sunday dinner as usual. We need to put this childish argument behind us. Father, we will not tolerate any further disrespect. If you choose to behave like ungrateful children, you will face the consequences." Ungrateful children. I stared at the screen in disbelief. They had humiliated my son, and yet, in their minds, we were the ones at fault. Then, one by one, the responses from my siblings rolled in. "Catherine, we won't be coming to Sunday dinner. Not this week. Not ever again. William, you've made it clear who you value in this family. We're done. Elizabeth, you owe Tommy an apology. Until that happens, I don't want to hear from either of you." I swallowed hard. This was real. My siblings were actually standing by me. I took a deep breath and typed my own message. "Me, you didn't just humiliate Tommy. You showed all of us exactly who you are. We're done pretending this is a family. You made your choice. Now live with it." And then, for the first time in my life, I muted the family group chat. The fallout begins. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. By the end of the week, my parents were already feeling the effects of our absence. For years, my siblings and I had taken on the responsibility of managing their lives. Elizabeth handled their medical appointments. William oversaw their investments. Catherine handled legal matters. And me. I coordinated everything else. The home repairs, the maintenance, the daily logistics of keeping their mansion running. Now they had no one. Elizabeth called me 2 days later, her voice barely containing her amusement. Guess who had to wait 3 hours to see their cardiologist because they don't have priority scheduling anymore? "No," I gasped. "Oh, yes," she laughed. "And guess who just had their home maintenance contract expire because nobody renewed it?" I smirked. My mother was obsessed with keeping their mansion pristine, but she had never lifted a finger herself. Now she'd have to deal with it alone. And it was only the beginning. The call. A week after Christmas, my phone rang. It was my mother. I hesitated before answering. "Hello." There was a long pause. Then, "Patricia." I knew that tone. It was the voice she used when she was trying to maintain control, trying to act like she was above whatever was happening. "Mother, this has gone on long enough," she said. "You need to stop this nonsense and bring Tommy to Sunday dinner." I almost laughed. "You mean the same dinner where he's ignored? The same dinner where he watches his cousins get spoiled while he gets treated like an afterthought?" "Don't be dramatic," she huffed. "It was one mistake." I felt my grip tighten on the phone. It wasn't one mistake. It was years of mistreatment, years of making him feel like he didn't belong. And you know what? We're done. You don't get to treat my son like that and expect me to just pretend it's okay. There was silence on the other end. "This family is falling apart because of you," she finally said. I shook my head. "No, Mother. This family is finally waking up. And you only have yourself to blame." And with that, I hung up. I turned around and saw Tommy watching me from the hallway. "Mom?" he asked. I walked over, kneeling beside him. "Yes, sweetheart. Are we really done with Grandma and Grandpa?" I hesitated. "I don't know, Tommy. But for now, we're choosing happiness." He thought about that for a moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "Okay, Mom. I like that." And just like that, the weight of my parents' judgment started to lift. For the first time in my life, I was free. The reckoning. A week had passed since my mother's phone call, and with each passing day, the weight of their absence felt lighter. At first, I had expected to feel guilt. After all, they were my parents. Cutting ties with them, even temporarily, should have left some kind of hollow ache. But instead, I felt free. No more Sunday dinners filled with judgmental glances. No more watching my son shrink under their cold indifference. No more pretending that we were a loving family when, in truth, my parents had always treated me, and especially Tommy, like we were less than. But if my parents thought we would come crawling back, they were sorely mistaken, and they were about to learn just how much they had lost. The dominoes began to fall. It started with something small. Elizabeth called one morning, barely able to contain her amusement. "You are not going to believe this," she said between bursts of laughter. "What?" I asked, smiling. "Mom's book club met yesterday, and apparently, word has gotten around that we've all cut her off." She tried to downplay it, of course, but the ladies weren't buying it. Greenwich's social circles are ruthless, Jen. And the fact that all her children have distanced themselves. People are talking. I almost felt bad for my mother. Almost. For years, she had built her reputation as the perfect matriarch, hosting charity galas, organizing events, making sure our family looked pristine from the outside. But now the cracks were showing, and in her world, reputation was everything. Then came the next blow. William, the numbers guy, was the first to see it. "They're struggling," he told us over a group call. "Dad's investments took a hit recently, and without me managing their portfolio, they've been making some terrible financial decisions." "How bad is it?" Catherine asked. "Bad," William replied. "They've been spending more than they should, assuming we'd always be there to pick up the slack. But now that we're not," he let out a low whistle. "They're scrambling." My father had always prided himself on his financial expertise, but the truth was, he had been relying on William for years. And now, without him, the consequences were catching up fast. Then came the final blow. The invitation. A formal letter arrived in the mail, neatly typed on expensive stationery. It was an invitation from my parents. I read it twice, unable to believe my eyes. "Dear family, we understand that emotions have been high and that misunderstandings have occurred. However, as the new year approaches, it is time to put our differences aside. We invite you all to a formal dinner at the house this Saturday. It is important that we restore order within our family. We expect your presence. Sincerely, Mother and Father." I stared at the letter, stunned. They weren't apologizing. They weren't acknowledging any wrongdoing. They were summoning us, as if we were wayward children who had strayed too far and needed to be brought back into line. I clenched my jaw. They still didn't get it. I picked up my phone and sent a single message to our group chat. They invited us to dinner. Thoughts. The responses came almost instantly. Catherine, absolutely not. William, they expect us to just obey them. After everything. Elizabeth, no way. If they want us back, they need to actually own up to what they did. I sighed, staring at the letter again. I had expected this, my parents trying to regain control. But I wasn't their puppet anymore. And neither was my son. A different kind of dinner. That Saturday, instead of going to my parents' house, we made other plans. We went out for dinner. Just me, Michael, Tommy, and my siblings with their families. A real family dinner. One where laughter filled the room. Where Tommy wasn't ignored or belittled. Where love was genuine. Tommy was grinning ear to ear, giggling as William showed him a magic trick with a napkin. "Hey, buddy," Michael said, nudging Tommy gently. "You having a good time?" "The best," Tommy said, eyes bright. "This is way better than Grandma and Grandpa's house." I felt a lump rise in my throat. He was right. This was better. Better than years of forced gatherings. Better than pretending we belonged in a family that had never truly accepted us. We weren't losing anything. We were gaining something. Real happiness. Real freedom. Real love. The desperate call. Later that night, just as I was tucking Tommy into bed, my phone rang. It was my mother. I hesitated, then answered. "Patricia," she said, her voice cool. "I assume you received our invitation." "I did," I replied, keeping my tone even. "And yet you did not come." "No," I said simply. Silence. "This rebellion of yours has gone on long enough," she said finally. "You are embarrassing yourself. Do you really think cutting us off is going to solve anything?" I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "Mom, we're not rebelling. We're choosing ourselves for once. Your father and I have done everything for you," she snapped. "And this is how you repay us. By abandoning your own family." That word, abandoning, set something off inside me. "You abandoned us first," I shot back. "You abandoned Tommy. You made him feel small. You made me feel like I was never enough. And we're done playing along." "You're being dramatic." "No," I said firmly. "I'm finally standing up for my son. And if you can't accept that, then we have nothing left to talk about." More silence. Then her voice, lower now, almost desperate. "You'll regret this." I exhaled. "No, Mom," I said softly. "For the first time in my life, I don't regret a thing." And with that, I hung up. The shift. As I walked back to Tommy's room, I found him sitting up in bed, watching me. "Mom," he asked, "was that Grandma?" I nodded. "She sounded mad," he said quietly. I walked over, sitting beside him. "She's upset, sweetie. But that's okay. Sometimes, when people don't treat you right, you have to walk away. Even if it's hard." Tommy thought about that for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "Like how you always tell me to stand up for myself." I smiled, brushing his curls back. "Exactly like that." He grinned. "I like this better. Just us." I felt my heart swell. "Me too, baby. Me too." And as I turned off the lights, I knew. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. A new beginning. The morning after my mother's phone call, I woke up feeling different, lighter, as if I had finally shed a weight I had carried my whole life. There was no more fear, no more guilt, no more pretending that things would change. Michael was still asleep beside me, the soft rise and fall of his breath steady in the quiet room. But downstairs, I heard small footsteps padding across the floor. Tommy. I slid out of bed and followed the sound, finding him curled up on the couch in his pajamas, his little hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. The twinkling lights of our Christmas tree still glowed softly in the dim morning light. "Couldn't sleep, baby?" I asked, sitting beside him. He shook his head, just thinking. "About what?" He hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. "About Grandma and Grandpa. Do you think they miss us?" I sighed, pulling him close. "Maybe, but missing someone doesn't mean they know how to love them the right way." He looked up at me. "Do you think they'll ever learn?" I thought about it for a moment. "I don't know, sweetheart, but that's not our job to worry about anymore. Our job is to be happy. And we are, right?" I smiled, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "More than ever. A life without them." The weeks passed, and something strange happened. Life got better. Without the weight of my parents' expectations, my home felt lighter. I laughed more. Michael and I spent more time together, real time, not just stolen moments between obligations. And Tommy thrived. Without the fear of judgment, he was his full, bright, beautiful self again. He didn't hesitate to tell stories at dinner, didn't shrink under the fear of being dismissed. And the best part, he never once asked to go back to my parents' house. Not even once. The final goodbye. It was nearly February when my parents tried one last time. I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, formal, carefully worded. "Patricia, enough is enough. You have proven your point. But family is family. You will always be a Sinclair. It is time to put this childish behavior behind you and return to your rightful place in this family. Bring Tommy. We will discuss this like adults. We expect you next Sunday." I stared at the words, the carefully controlled tone. Even now, they still didn't get it. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They weren't apologizing. They were demanding control. Again. Michael saw the letter in my hands and raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. The royal decree. I exhaled, shaking my head. They'll never change, will they? He wrapped an arm around me, pressing a kiss to my temple. No, love. They won't. I smiled, a small, knowing smile. Good, because neither will I. I grabbed the letter, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the trash. Michael grinned. That felt good, didn't it? Better than good. And just like that, it was over. The happiest ending. A year later, I sat in our backyard, watching Tommy chase Michael across the lawn. The summer air was warm, the laughter ringing through the space in a way that felt like home. Real home. Elizabeth and her kids were coming over soon, along with Catherine and William. Because this was my family. Not the people who demanded loyalty without love. Not the parents who had spent years making me feel small. No. Family was the people who chose you, who stood beside you, who loved you fully without condition, without cruelty. Mom, Tommy called, running up to me, his face glowing with joy. Yes, baby. He grinned. I love our family. And in that moment I knew we hadn't lost anything. We had won. We had everything we would ever need. And we were finally free. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.